So this section now is telling the story of the land, ranches in the Southeast. And our morning will begin with storytelling about the land upon which we gather for this conference. Local ranchers Eric and Mary Tucker and Steve and Joy Wooten will discuss their relationships to the land and the Santa Fe Trail and sustainable vision for grassland management in southern Colorado. You know a little bit about this, but I'll give you Eric's bio. He's a cowboy by choice and not by family tradition, which is pretty unusual. He passed many years working in feedlots and became increasingly aware of how cow management was really land management. He and his wife bought a ranch in Ordway, Colorado, where they're learning and working to build a sustainable cattle operation. And this was the greatest line. He's a YouTube graduate, and thank you, Maggie. You took that.
So we've done some cover cropping. We've tried it. We've done some no-till and then grazed cattle and some other livestock. Really the problem with Crowley County is it's so degraded that the cover cropping really doesn't work unless there's an abundance of moisture. Around here we have 9 to 11 inches of moisture, some snow, mostly just dry, hot and dry. Even when it's cold and dry, it's still hot and dry. But what we found out is the soil microbiology are the drivers. So we choose to use cattle for most of our land restoration projects. Cattle are pretty fluid. We can work with them. We can apply a lot of stockmanship and get the cattle to do what we want them to do. We use a lot of electric fence and portable water, and we can get the cattle at the right time at the right place for the right reasons. And they concentrated. We can use a bigger impact or a wider impact depending on exactly what we need to do. These are some of the cover crops that we've had some pretty good success with. Some turnips and some rye and oats and peas, brassicas and grasses, cool season annuals. It's done some good. Mostly just have to keep on it when we can get the moisture to make it work. Some radishes and some other brassicas interseeded into some of the rye that had already grown. That was a pretty good batch. That's my daughter. We were out doing some bricks testing to find out what was going on and what the energy values were. It worked out real good. Out on our pasture walks, we've been noticing and monitoring for the native plants that are coming back. Indian paintbrush. Some more of our monitoring and pasture walks, we found some stuff that we didn't know what it was, but we found out this is spotted gay feather. Sand drop seed. What was unique about this is it's kind of growing out in a sea of old kochia. So I'm looking around for telltale signs of how to improve this ranch land. So every time we come across some green growing grass, it's pretty fascinating. We're always trying to study to see exactly what is the tipping point. And with all the oxidized kochia weed from last year or the year before, plus the fresh growth, it was refreshing to see some grass coming along. And sand drop seed is pretty tenacious. It wants to live here. It responds well to grazing and rest and recovery. And we've got quite a bit of it growing. Alkali saccatone is a real good grass to have. I'm glad that we have quite a bit of it and it's starting to expand. It's good for grazing and the cattle like it, and it's pretty tenacious. It's filling in some bare spots, which is very welcome. We have a lot of kochia. Crowley County is the epicenter for kochia. With the degraded land and the bacterial soils, it really works out for grazing. We don't have hardly any trouble with it because we've understood how the plant grows and what it likes and what it'll respond to, and we're always grazing the top third. We're moving daily or every other day so that we don't get too far down on the stem. That's where all the nitrates are. That's where the problems are. But if you stay up in the top end where the energy is, the cattle respond well and do well, and it holds its feed value throughout the year in the cold, and it also maintains a high level of protein. Some kochia and alkali sacchetone, and the cattle are doing well on it. Flexibility and portability. We use a lot of electric fence. We will haul water to get the cattle to the right place at the right time for the right reasons, even if it means just hauling a pickup load of water in a portable tank. We found out that we've got grass growing in certain areas, and we're always trying to manage for the grass. So we want to do the best we can to promote the grass, and having the cattle there, even if we just have to haul water and put up a little fence, makes a lot more sense than either overgrazing or undergrazing or total rest or no rest at all. And it's starting to play out. We've got more grass growing than we've had before on our places. Cattle are very pliable. They enjoy fresh grass, whether it's multiple times a day or every other day moves, or even if they have to stay for a week due to being in a meeting pasture. They all are fence broke and do a good job of staying in. They're all full, happy. They're waiting for the next move. Part of an enclosure project we were working on where we condensed all the cattle in a very small area to see what would happen if we could stimulate the biology to grow and aerate the land a little bit. These cattle were just stood up waiting to be moved. One of our bad bare spots, but it's starting to grow quite a bit of kochia. So we had some cattle in there for a short period of time and then supplied it with water recovery, and it's starting to grow. Not too far away from where that big spot of bare ground was. This is mostly just kochia, some Russian thistle, and some remnants of some grass that's starting to grow. Cattle are just moving through. Just the same shot from a different angle. It's actually just slightly north of where that bare spot was. Well, we graze year round. We leave the cattle out on pasture. This project was a soil health building project. These cattle were all on stock fields, moved daily, and what we were trying to accomplish here is just restore some old farm ground back into some grass or some better pasture, and it had some irrigation water, but it was all furrowed out. So we were using some cover crops and cattle, and the farmer was really happy. The previous years hadn't been too good, but after we utilized the cattle on it, yield started to come up and things started to get a lot better. This is on the same place. Instead of having the bare soil over the winter, they planted triticale, and we brought the cattle in to graze the triticale, helping to build soil health and maintain some economics on the soil health restoration projects. So on this, we just bought this ranch, closed on it in December, so we decided to do a lot of monitoring and find out exactly what we had and what we didn't have. So we've set up a couple of transits throughout the place, and really just doing some monitoring. We walk around quite often and observe what plants are around, and the sophisticated monitoring transit, we've been able to get a pretty good handle on what's here as far as bare ground, what's growing, different forbs, different grasses. It's been pretty enlightening to see what we've got. Yeah, this is one of our grass transits. Quite a bit of guyetta grass and some Russian knapweed and some kochia, and there's even some grama grass in there. Quite a diversity. This is the first transit we did. It's quite a little bit different story. There's quite a bit of grass, or actually quite a bit of forbs, kochia weed, some rabbit brush, some grass, some alkali saccatone, a lot of guyetta grass, and bare ground. Our grazing program in the past has included goats and a wide variety of cattle. We've also grazed some sheep. We think there's a place for all of it in the future. When I get a little bit lost and confused on what I should be thinking about, this is kind of what I try to keep in balance. It's about growing grass for cattle, turning the income to grow more grass. One of my future projects that I'm working on right now is to close the loop so that I can get the above ground herd to feed the underground herd, so that the underground herd will biologically stimulate more grass growth so we can replenish our rangelands. And this is a continuing project, trying to make a closed feedback loop with some additions of some supplemental feed, not so much substitutionary feed, but supplemental, to get the value out of the cattle that I need to create the income that we need to keep working on the underground herd, which is the microbiology. And then as we do that, we would start to create an upward spiral, growing better grass and more livestock capacity, more income ability, with my beliefs that ranching is the most economic business I can be in when it's based on sunshine, rainfall, forage grown, and livestock converted to cash flow. We can utilize all the attributes to develop more soil health. The two go together hand in hand, or something like that. But if we'll maintain a above ground herd, we can stimulate and grow a below ground herd and benefit on both ends.
Steve Wooten is a fourth generation cattle rancher in southern Colorado. I guess that means that he's not by choice. I guess he'll tell us that himself. He's owner of the Beatty Canyon Ranch and has been living and working on the land for most of his life. That is his on the land that his great-grandfather purchased in 1929. Now joined by both the fifth and sixth generation, Steve has devoted his life to the proper care of his family, land, cattle, learning everything he can about them and everything in between.
Thank you all for the opportunity to share with you a little bit of the history of our ranch and its history in the Lower Purgatory and the Santa Fe Trail. The historic Santa Fe Trail region is a unique area in Colorado. As you can see in the picture, there's the homes that were on the plains that were associated as far back as sheep and goat agriculture, and then moving forward to the agriculture of today, the cattle, the unique canyon structure, and of course in our case, a multi-generational family that has the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth generations often working together on a day-to-day basis. Throughout this region of private lands, you get to see the diverse cultures that have left their imprints. These are largely intact, such as the Native American dwelling sites in the two bottom pictures, the Hispanic cemetery gravestone head, and then the modern gravestone of my mother in the same cemetery as the Hispanic. This is a very unique panel that I think depicts the presence pre-Native American, and that is you don't see any of the animal symbols or human symbols in it. This is strictly line drawings and anything but animal creatures that indicates an older culture. This is a really unique structure in that it's a very large Indian Native American dwelling site. When we showed this to some scientists from Harvard, Yale, and Western Wyoming Community College, they were very excited about it, and this one was selected to do an archaeological dig. But first we cored it to make sure it wasn't a burial site due to its size, and finding out that it was an inhabited site, then we moved forward with the survey. One of the reasons that we chose to work with the people that we did, not only because of good references, but because they paralleled our philosophy of keeping sites intact, and that is not removing the historical elements away from the site, but leaving them there so that future generations like my grandchildren can go to the site and see the same elements that I saw and that my grandparents saw. The next significant culture in the region is the Hispanic culture. And you see here the letters for J, Antonio, and then the large C, that stands for Cordova. And the Cordova family homesteaded the area that we're in. And as a matter of fact, my uncle's home on the property was originally built by the Cordovas and then added onto by the Blues and then added onto again by the Dohertys. And so that culture is kept maintained in that same structure. This is an example of the Hispanic architecture. What is missing here is the adobe on the exterior of the cabin. The roof is largely caved in, but it was manufactured out of wood and then sodded over to keep it sealed both on the rocks and from the roof. This is an example of another type of architecture in our region, and that's using wood. And most of this wood is juniper because it's so readily available in our area. The other thing to note about this is the two phases of construction, the furthest being probably the first, and then the second where the logs are interlocked and there's actually some framing around doorways and things like that is a second. This also would have been adobe to seal it and protect it. This is an example on the inside of that wood structure where you see that the adobe is intact because it hasn't been attacked by rain or snow. And so barring the cracks in it, it's still holding itself together and in relative good shape. And a lot of the history is there to be seen also. This structure is getting closer to the 1920s when it was inhabited. They also had a phone line running to this house. You can see that the ability to have glass windows and sliding windows and a significant improvement in door structure. But what's really neat about this house is the mason took the pains to bevel the corners anywhere that a human would be passing. So through the doorways and things like that, he beveled the rock to make it a smooth transition. This is our headquarters where we've used a single building for multiple uses. It has our home in one end, it has our mechanic shop and storage in part of it, and it also has our calving facilities in it. The other great thing about our region is the diversity, whether it's these large mammals or if it's the fish in the Purgatory River or the amphibians that associated with those waterways, or even the insects. Because this is largely an intact prairie ecosystem, there's been a minimum of pesticides applied, and so you see a lot of diversity and populace in our resources. So these two are really unique to our region. One time when Joy was doing some research, she found a log from conquistadors in the 1600s that talked about moving through a canyon of red sandstone cliffs and seeing bighorn sheep. The sheep were reintroduced by my grandmother in 1980. 17 head were turned out, and today there's over 550 head of sheep in this unit. The white-tailed doe on the other side is unique in that in 1990, I don't recall seeing whitetails of any population in the Purgatory. And through migration from Kansas up the Arkansas and Purgatory, we have a good significant amount of whitetail along with our mule deer. So what are the challenges to ranching in this modern era of agriculture with markets and unsure weather patterns and drought as a constant battle? And the answer to that is diversification. And there's many ranches that have taken this on to entertain guests and derive income that doesn't require additional consumption of the natural resources. When you live in a region like eastern Los Animas County, where there's not off-the-farm jobs, you can't just drive to town. Town is an hour and a half away for us. Then you've got to find creative ways to use your own skill sets. And one of those ways is cowboys making custom gear that other cowboys need. These are examples of the custom-made bags, purses, and items that my wife makes and sells online and by reference. So several times a year, we will have a group of artists come with a teacher, whether it's oils or watercolor or pastels, and they'll spend 3 to 4 days with the teacher teaching and us providing transportation, lodging, and food. And this is an example of the product that we can do with selling our landscape rock. This is a location west of Golden on Lookout Mountain where we delivered the boulders and set them, and then the large boulder you see by the mailboxes, they had a company come up and etch into the rock and then put the numbers for the house there on the rock. We like to call this area in Colorado because people are so surprised to think that the plains of Colorado actually has a huge canyon structure, and we refer to it as the best kept secret. So in 2006 and 2007, we decided that we needed to find out just how functioning the ecosystem in southeast Colorado is, and we asked the folks at Colorado Natural Heritage Program up at Colorado State University to do a biological inventory of our region. And after just 2 weeks of work with the amount of documentation that they were discovering, Renee Rondeau said it's like being in a wilderness area. It is the best kept secret in Colorado that the biggest wilderness area we have is in private hands. Their executive summary after the survey was completed stated that despite the variety of management plans, the overall ecosystem is in incredibly good shape. In February of 2007, the Santa Fe Trail region was placed on Colorado's most endangered sites list. Then in June of 2007, it was placed on the National Trust's 11 most endangered list. And then President of the National Trust, Richard Moe, said the loss of this pristine, scenic open space threatened those who live here and those who love this state and the unspoiled natural and cultural resources that make it one of a kind. We must take action to protect Colorado's working landscape or risk the agricultural, environmental, and economic consequences of a decision that cannot be undone. Boy, to me, that sounds like Richard was talking about sustainability a decade before it was heard in the media or in the culture. So thank you for this time. Appreciate you giving me the opportunity to share with you, but there's a couple of things I want to do the housework on, and that's thank you to the photos, to Russell Snitzer, Brian Baxter, and Joy Wooten. And for the historical content, I think Rebecca Goodwin.
I live in Denver, and there's a place called Harvard Gulch that has a little stream that runs down it, and it is absolutely overgrown with kochia and Russian knapweed. So what I think we need to do is to convince Mayor Hancock to get a herd of cattle